For the past several weeks, we have been pondering passages. Each of the 8 passages that we have pondered thus far have been from the New Testament. But there is one passage that was requested that's from the Old Testament. And it's the 139th Psalm, which I looked at the 139th Psalm and came up with the title of He Knows You. And maybe you can even write "you" in all caps, because that seems to be the gist of what he's saying. But this will be the final lesson in our series, unless someone has a request for another passage to ponder, and then we can do that one. Or if you have one later on that you'd like us to ponder, that's fine too. But while you're turning to the 139th Psalm, I want to ask you a few questions. Well, because it's kind of sort of to warm up our brains a little bit. I mean, it's Sunday night, it's 6:15, got to go back to work tomorrow for the most part and all. And so we need a few things to wake our brains up so we can try to grasp some of these incredible things that we're about to read concerning God. First question, which country makes Panama hats? You're exactly right, Ecuador. From what animal do we get catgut? Used in surgery, I guess. From sheep and horses, of course. Here's an easy one for you. In what month does Russia celebrate the October Revolution? November is the right answer. Because their calendar used to be 13 days behind ours until they moved it up, and so now their October Revolution is celebrated in November. How long did the 100 Years' War last? 116 years, from 1337 to 1453. Another easy one for you. The Canary Islands in the Pacific are named after what animal? Dogs. Canines. Okay? Canaries. What color is a purple finch? Not purple. Red. Where are Chinese gooseberries from? And it's a shame that Mike Rain from Farmington isn't here, because he could tell you New Zealand. And finally, how long did the 30 Years' War last? 30 years. From 1618 to 1648. So did anybody get them all right? Did any of them get one right? More than one right? Did anybody get any of them right? Now, I wanted to go through this little exercise, not because it would make you laugh or anything like that, but simply because a lot of times our knowledge is very limited, isn't it? We may think that we know something, but if somebody asks us about it, we can't really give them the right answer. Even when we think we know something, we may or may not be right. But in the 139th Psalm, we find out that such is not the case with God. Let's begin by looking at the context of the Psalm. Now, I don't know if the context part was a little easier or a little harder for an Old Testament, for a Psalm, because the Psalms sort of kind of stand on their own. And so most of the Psalms stand on their own, and so maybe it's a little harder to put it in the proper context, or maybe that makes it easier. Maybe what we need to do is know what was going on in the psalmist's life when he wrote the psalm, sort of like Psalm 51, after David was confronted by Nathan the prophet about his sin with Bathsheba, he wrote the 51st Psalm. Or there are other psalms that he wrote when he was running for his life from Absalom or from Saul and so forth. And that sort of gives us a little bit of context to what he was thinking as he wrote the psalm. We don't know much about what David was doing when he wrote the 139th Psalm. But from studying the psalm, we can know that David wrote the 139th psalm about God's relationship with him and his response to God's relationship, to how God was with him. In this psalm, David shares some things and writes some things that are really crucial for every human being to understand. We need to understand these things and appreciate these things. If we are to fulfill God's will for our lives, we have to wrap our brains around some pretty intense concepts. And that's what we're going to be talking about a little bit this evening, is some of these really difficult concepts that we're going to try to wrap our finite brains around. So David wrote the 139th Psalm about God's relationship to him and his response to what God has done for him. David also wrote the 139th Psalm about how we can make a difference. Do you ever reflect on your life and wonder if it's significant? Do you ever feel like the hamster in the wheel, in his cage, and you're running and you're running and you're running and you're running as fast as you can, as hard as you can, and when you finish running, you're in exactly the same spot that you started? If you ever go to a gym and work out, it's the same thing. That's why we got a membership up here, but we haven't been there in probably 8 months because it's silly to run and run and run and run and not get anywhere, right? So go run out. Well, no, it's too hot or too cold outside. So anyway, but the point is, does your life have significance? Do you ever pause to add up what your life has come to and you realize you came up short? Do you ever reflect on your life and wonder if you made a difference? Now, some people say, well, I'm just a plumber from Siloam Springs, Arkansas. How can I make a difference? How can I be anything special? I don't really matter to anybody. I'm just whatever job you have, however you want to describe yourself. I'm just that I'm living in Siloam Springs, Arkansas. I don't matter to anybody. I'm not special at all. I'm just sort of here. If so, if you've ever thought those things about yourself, doubted your significance, doubted whether or not you can make a difference, then God has a word for you, and it's in the 139th Psalm. So let's go ahead and take a look at the first 18 verses. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from afar. You search out my path and my lying down, and are acquainted with all my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. You hem me in behind and before, and lay on your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high, I cannot attain it. Where shall I go from your spirit? Or where shall I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light about me be night, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is bright as the day, for darkness is as light with you. For you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. How precious to me are your thoughts, O God! How vast is the sum of them! If I would count them, they are more than the sand. I awake and I am still with you. Let's begin pondering the meaning of the passage of the 139th Psalm. First part of the meaning, though, has to do, I believe, with God's knowledge. God's knowledge. Now, when you think about God's knowledge, okay, you need to understand that it's not just limited to books or to book smarts. He doesn't just know a lot about physics and biology and calculus and history and all these other academic subjects that we are asked sometimes to learn about. He doesn't know just about those things. He doesn't just know the correct answer to every question any teacher anywhere ever put onto a test. He doesn't just know that stuff. He doesn't just know the academic things. And his knowledge is not limited to big things either. Things like what's happening with the nations, what's happening with masses of people, or what's happening with the earth on a grand scale. Now, certainly he has those book smarts. He knows about the big things. But David says that he knows me personally. This little speck on this little speck of a planet, in this speck of a galaxy, in his incomprehensibly big universe, and he knows me. He knows me. And it's not just that he knows my name, but he knows every mundane thing and minute detail about me. In fact, you could say he knows me better than I know myself. In fact, in the first 6 verses of the 139th Psalm, I'm told, because I don't know any Hebrew, but I'm told that there are 8 Hebrew words in the first 6 verses that tell you that God knows your story intimately. Just a couple quick examples of this. You know, verse 2, you know when I sit down and when I rise up. God knows when you sit down, He knows when you stand. How mundane of knowledge is that? Yet He knows. And then He says, you search out my path and my lying down and are acquainted with all my ways. You can't go anywhere that He doesn't know where you're at. Jonah tried that. It didn't work out so well for him. Many people have tried running, but they can't do it. And then verse 4, even before a word is on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. You think about something and God knows it. Now, that is also known as a very fancy word. It's called omniscience. There we go. I'll get it out. Omniscience. The word omni means all. Okay? So omni plumbing is all plumbing. So there's not a thing you can't ask them to do about plumbing because they're all plumbing. Okay? But omni means all. Science, which is the second part of the word there, means knowledge. So God has all knowledge. All, not partial knowledge, not some knowledge, not most knowledge, not 99% knowledge. He has all knowledge. He is all-knowing. Now then, that thought alone, that God is all-knowing, that thought alone can either encourage you or it can scare you to death. It has that power that He knows everything. God's knowledge is not limited, period. He knows everything. David also speaks about God's location. You know, we oftentimes, little kids ask, where is God? And we say, well, He's up in heaven. Okay. We're not purposefully, willfully misleading little children. But God is up in heaven, but He is also elsewhere as well. And God is watching us. Now, Bette Midler would tell us in one of her songs that God is watching us from a distant shore. And it makes a beautiful song, okay? It's just pretty bad theology, okay? Because God is not watching us from a distant shore. He's not just in heaven. God is right up close and personal with us. That's the point of verses 7 through 12 in this psalm. You cannot go anywhere that God is not. Now, there's another fancy word for this. It's called omnipresent. Omni still means all. Present means, well, location, presence. He is everywhere, all at the same time. And He is fully aware of everything that is going on everywhere, all at the same time. Try to wrap your mind around that, okay? Try to figure it out. I know that in the movie Bruce Almighty, which was a so-so Jim Carrey movie, but apparently God, played by Morgan Freeman, who else would play God, right? With his voice and all. But Morgan Freeman's character, God, tells Bruce, you think you can do a better job? Then, okay, you've got my powers. And then he's standing there one time, and then all of a sudden, he starts hearing all these voices in his head. And he thinks he's going crazy and everything, and it's people praying. And he's hearing it. And then it turns out it was only, a portion of New York City that he was hearing, but that's beside the point. The point is that God has all that going on, but it's not a garbled mess to Him. Each person, each time that we pray, God hears it clearly and distinctly. Even if 17 million other people are praying at the same time, He hears it just fine for us. God's knowledge is not limited. God's location is not limited. What about God's work? Beginning in verse 13 and going down to verse 18, it speaks of God's work. David does. Is God working in your life? You bet He is. But did you know that He was working in your life before you were born? Now, how awesome is that? How incredible is that? Look again at verse 13. For you, God, formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. How special does that make you? That God took the time to knit you together in your mother's womb. How special does that make you? How incredible is that? God has always been involved in your life, even from your conception. God has been at work. He has been working in your life. And then, after your birth, He continues to work in your life. Look at verse 14 again. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. You are His wonderful creation. Me? Little old me? I mean, my body not exactly like it used to be. It's starting to run down a little bit. Well, guess what? You are still His wonderful creation. Isn't that incredible? I want you to think for just a moment. Think about your eye, okay? Your eye, if you want to focus on something up close, it automatically adjusts so you can focus on it. If you want to focus on something far away, it automatically adjusts so you can focus on that thing. In between, same thing. It automatically adjusts to whatever distance it needs to. It automatically senses the variations in light and makes adjustments for the lighting. If it's poor light, your eyes get a little bit bigger. The iris and pupils get a little bigger. Let more light in so you can see. And there's self-cleaning. What happens when when a piece of dust blows into your eye? A tear forms, doesn't it? Does it form because you're sad? No. It forms because it's getting the dust out. And then you blink and it's windshield wipers. How incredible is that? And then think about the stuff that your body does without you thinking about it, okay? How many of you have to constantly remind your heart that it needs to pump blood? Anybody? No, of course not. The heart automatically does that. What about reminding your lungs that they need to breathe in and breathe out? Breathe in and breathe. No, you don't have to remind your lungs. They know what to do. What about the digestive system? Fortunately, we don't have to tell it what to do. It just does what it's supposed to do, and everything is good. Sounds like somebody who created us, knit us together in our mother's womb, knew what he was doing, knew what he was creating. God knows you completely. God is with you wherever you go. If you ever have a thought that, well, you know what, I got to check to see if anybody's watching, because if somebody's watching, I don't want to do this, you better not do it, because God is always watching. And you are the product of God's work, even before you were born. So what does all of this mean? Well, we see David's response in verses 19 through 24, which brings us to the application part. Let's read verses 19 through 24. Oh, that you would slay the wicked, O God. O men of blood, depart from me. They speak against you with malicious intent. Your enemies take your name in vain. Do I not hate those who hate you, O Lord? And do I not loathe those who rise up against you? I hate them with complete hatred. I count them my enemies. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there be any grievous way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. David's wish for the wicked, verses 19 through 22. What does he wish for the wicked? He wishes for them that God would slay them. Okay, I want you to figure this out, okay? The first 18 verses, David is writing verses, writing poetry that's suitable for a Dayspring card. Okay? Got to remember where I'm at. Okay. He's writing poetry suitable for a greeting card. Right? And he goes from this fluff and flowery stuff to writing, hateful and vengeful things. I mean, you might find, even if you look, you might find parts of Psalm 139, 1 through 18 on a bookmark somewhere, or maybe a coffee mug or a t-shirt, something to that effect, but you're not going to find verses 19 through 22. David wishes God would slay the wicked. He says, I hate them. Notice verse 22, I hate them with complete hatred. But notice why he hates them so badly. Look back at verses 21 and 22 and you put them together. He hates them so badly because they hate and had risen up against God. But we have to ask, and we got to wonder, was this attitude good and right? Is this an attitude that God would approve of? I mean, sure, it doesn't sound Christ-like, does it? I mean, Christ is the one who said, love your enemies. Christ was the one who, as they were crucifying him, he prayed, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they are doing. I think David here is expressing the feelings of his own heart. Now, that's not to say that this part of the psalm is not inspired by God or anything. That's not what I'm saying at all. I think David is an imperfect man. And God used people when he was writing the Bible for a purpose. So he's expressing his feelings. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. But the point of verses 19 through 22, the point is that because of the way God treats us, that he talked about in verses 1 through 18, because of all that God does for us, because of the fact that God pays attention to us, that God loves us, that God is with us, that God made us, that God works in us, because of all these things that God does for us. God deserves our love and respect in return. And if some person doesn't give God love and respect in return for all that God has done for us, David has no use for them. And there are some people who are just going to reject God. I've had Bible studies with people. They said, yeah, I'll study the Bible with you, but you're not going to convince me of anything. Okay, then I'm not going to cast my pearl before swine. I'll say, if you ever do want to learn, then come and talk to me. And, we're still friends and move on. David's wish for the wicked is not necessarily just a condemnation of the wicked. His thing is, if people aren't going to return the love and respect to God after all God has done for them, then God, just take them out of the way. Because people like that just drag others down. Then in verses 23 and 24, David offers a prayer for himself. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there be any grievous way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. Friends, this is the prayer of a man who genuinely desires to be pleasing to God. He is asking God to look at his life, to gaze deeply into his heart. And he's saying, God, if you find anything, anywhere in my life, in my heart, if you find anything that is not absolutely 100% pleasing to you, then take it out of my life. I don't care how badly I like it. I don't care how badly I enjoy it. If it's not pleasing to you, take it away. I don't want it in my life, because what I want more is to serve and to please you. And my friends, this is the prayer that we should pray regularly, daily. We should pray this prayer. And you know what? That's not easy to do, is it? Because there are some things in my life that maybe shouldn't be in my life that I kind of enjoy. They kind of make life, quote unquote, worth living, right? But if they're not pleasing to God and they're in my life, then my life isn't going to be pleasing to God. This should be the response of our heart to how good God is to us. And something? God is not after perfection. Praise to Him that He's not after perfection. But God does want hearts that are willing to be molded by Him. Thus David was an imperfect man. I mean, you look at some of the stuff that he did, some of the stunts that he pulled, and he wasn't perfect. But he had this attitude. He genuinely desired to be pleasing to God. And because of that, David is known as a man after God's own heart. When you consider your relationship to God, what is your response? Are you more inclined to burst into praise like David was? Or are you more inclined, maybe to change the subject because your relationship isn't all that you know it should be? When you ponder God's omniscience, when you ponder His omnipresence, what is your response? Does it scare you? Does it comfort you? God has been working on you since before you were born. And you know what? He's not done yet. So long as you have lungs that process oxygen, so long as you have a heart that circulates blood through your body, so long as you have a brain that controls the functions of your body, God is not done with you yet. He knows you. He knows any limitations that you may have. And He knows, and He has a plan for you? Are you willing to allow Him to continue to work in and to continue to shape your life? I hope so. I think so. Because you're here on a Sunday night after all. And that's a good first step. Again, does the idea that God knows every single thing about you cause you comfort or cause you to get a little bit nervous? As Christians, it ought to comfort us. Comfort us because He knows the good about us, and comfort us because He knows the bad about us. Wait, how come Him knowing the bad about us can be comforting? Well, think about this. He knows all the bad things that you have ever done in your entire life, and He loves you anyway. Isn't that incredible? This evening, if you are subject to the invitation of Jesus, we always want to provide an opportunity for you to make that response known, be it in a public way or perhaps in a private way or in a semi-private way, whatever the case is. We want to give you that opportunity. If you're subject to the invitation for prayer, baptism, or some other public need, won't you come to the front now as we stand and sing together?